And today is Tuesday, April 13th, 2021 in the Gregorian calendar, and the first day of the new month of Iyar, Rosh Chodesh Iyar, the new Israelite Hebrew month in the Israelite Hebrew calendar. We are broadcasting from the land of Israel, city of God, Jerusalem, Hill of the Priests, Abu Tur, Givat Hanania, overlooking Mount Moriah, where we believe that the third and final Israelite temple of Jerusalem will soon be under reconstruction and stand forever, as per the prophet Ezekiel's vision. Please see the biblical book of Ezekiel, chapters 40 through 48. Our speaker for this evening is an old friend, His Excellency, Ambassador Rodrigo Carreras, former ambassador of Costa Rica to Israel, who will be speaking about my father, Reverend Dr. Benjamin Nunez, and the Costa Rican and Israeli revolutions of 1948. Now, I could give an introduction, but the danger there is I might not stop, and then we'll have little time left over for the lecture, because you're dealing with people here who are, as we would say in Hebrew, lamala min hateva, above the natural. You're not dealing, Reverend Dr. Benjamin Nunez Vargas this is a person like Corey Christensen from Norway. This kind of person you'll read about in history books in 50 years and may already be reading about now. These are larger than life people. They exist. 1 in a million, like Oskar Schindler. You're about to hear about one such person from his son, who's also larger than life, in a country that's larger than life, which has a very unusual background in terms of its ancestry. Sometimes things are staring us right in the face, but we don't have the tools to look at them. Now, I can't help myself. Here's my introduction. Did you know that throughout the Spanish-speaking world and Portuguese, in the 500 years since the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal, there are millions and millions of people of full or partial Jewish descent who are coming back to their Jewish roots in many ways. And Costa Rica is a remarkable country in that a third, like the island of Mallorca off the coast of Spain, a substantial part of the population is aware of this and or believes it. Someone could say, well, that's not true. So let's leave out aware and say believe. But I think aware because it is true. So the relationship of Costa Rica to the state of Israel and Ambassador Carreras' father's roles as a father of the Costa Rican Revolution and friend of the Israeli Revolution, the same year, 1948, there's a lot going on here. Also, the Costa Rican Revolution was without violence, which is highly remarkable. And Ambassador Carreras' father, kind of Mahatma Gandhi of Costa Rica, was a key figure in seeing that it didn't turn into what happened in Romania when communism fell in 1989, 1990. So more than enough said, and much more to say. Now, our program chair is Dr. Les Glassman. And Les, would you like to add a few words before we begin? Les will also take the questions and the comments and conclude the program.
Okay, well, I must just tell you, thank you, Lowell. It's such an incredible honor and a privilege to have you, Excellency Ambassador Carrera. You know, just even listening to and reading what your father did and what you did, one thing comes to mind when they had the resolution at the UN that equating Zionism with racism, there were 3 ambassadors that got up to speak against this terrible resolution. One was the Israeli ambassador to the UN, Moynihan from America, and your father. And after your father gave his speech in defense of Israel and the Jewish people, an Egyptian diplomat came up to your father at the podium and he gave him a punch in his face. And your father, being such an incredible Roman Catholic priest and turning the other cheek, he actually didn't react and he didn't fight back. But he fought for the state of Israel and he fought for the Jewish people. And he's instilled this love of what's right and God's chosen people. Your father's instilled this love to you as well. And you've been ambassador twice to the state of Israel. So it is the greatest honor and privilege to have you today. And we so look forward to your presentation. And Lowell, thank you so much for organizing this. Okay, so without any further ado, Your Excellency, Ambassador Rodrigo, Xavier Carreras, if you could grace us with your presence. Thank you.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with you this morning, or this evening for you. And I don't know what hour for other people who will be hearing us. But it is especially satisfying. It makes me feel like if I were back in Jerusalem. But it makes me very happy to do it when I have to speak about my father. Lowell and I, as he was saying, have been friends for a long, long time. When I used to be ambassador and our embassy was in Jerusalem, I used to live in Jerusalem. We had a very nice embassy. And once I visited a Roots and Branch invitation, which was very interesting. It was somewhere where we spoke about no-hide beliefs and no-hide followings for non-Jews. And of course, it was something that interested me because I am not Jewish. Because you can see my house is full of Jewish things. And they are very important Jewish things. For instance, that Hanukkah behind me, the big one, was given to my father by Abba Eban, among all people. And somewhere right there, I have a beautiful Tanakh given by Ben Gurion to my father. And it is that my father actually, he wasn't our first ambassador to Jerusalem. He was, there were several before him. And among them, ex-President Monge, may God bless his memory also, and ex-President Figueres was a very, very good friend of Ben Gurion since our revolution. And it's that our revolution took place in 1948. We call it the 1948 revolution. And it was not actually a peaceful revolution. It was a very bloody revolution, if you will forgive the word, but that's what it was. Because Costa Rica at the time used to have only 7,500 people. And the Civil War was something that took a little over a month. At this time, April, month of April, it was particularly the time of the Civil War. It took a little over a month. And at that little over a month, we had 3,500 people killed. 3,005 people killed in a country with 750,000 people in less than a month. It's a very, 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 very high level of casualties. And however, my father was the chaplain of the National Liberation Army, which is a very particular army, that the first thing that Mr. Figueres did after the triumph of the revolution was that he abolished the Costa Rican army. Therefore, since then, over 70 years ago, Costa Rica has been a country without an army at all. I have another chat, which I'll be very glad to share with Lowell, and so he can share it with you, particularly on this subject, because we have an interesting project going on in Israel. It's held up now until the day after. I don't know when the day after will be. But it was an idea that when I met with Chairman Arafat in Ramallah, I told him, Chairman Arafat, and all the accords that exist, there's always mention of a of a of a demilitarized Palestine. And I want to tell you that demilitarization is not the way, because demilitarization is a concept in which you lose a war. First war, we can find that in the First World War, and later the victorious people demilitarize you, and you are forgiven to have an army. In the case of Costa Rica, that was not the case. It was that a triumphant general, Jose Figueres, decided to abolish the Costa Rican army. Look at this, with intelligence that 1 month after the day that he abolished the army, we would be invaded from Nicaragua by irregular Costa Rican forces that had lost the Civil War, aided by dictator Somoza at that time. And this is something that is not done usually. And something that is not done usually is also the way we achieved peace in Costa Rica. My father's job during the Civil War, before he had been a union leader, he had been sent by his archbishop to study sociology in the United States, in the University of Niagara, later at the University, Catholic University in Washington, D.C. And there he was formed to be a sociologist. And the bishop sent him to study sociology because he wanted to come back to Costa Rica to form Catholic unions in order to have them face the communist unions that were growing very strong in Costa Rica. That gives you an idea about him. I sent Lowell yesterday, I hope he found it, to his email, PDF of a book that we wrote on my father last time I was in Jerusalem. Actually, even if I did not live in Jerusalem, because you know where the ambassador lives, that's the embassy. The embassy is exactly the same, the residence of the embassy, as the offices of the embassy. Usually when you are invited to a national day of a country, you are invited to the residence. You are seldom invited for a party in the offices. When I was sent to Israel again last time, the president, a lady president we had at that time, asked me, Rodrigo, will you accept to be my ambassador to Jerusalem again, to Israel again? And I said, yes, Mrs. President, Madam President, I accept, but please don't make me live in Herzliya. Because if I am living in Herzliya, I will only meet rich Israelis and other diplomats. Please let me live. I know I can't live in Jerusalem where I like it, but let me live in Mevaseret Zion. So my residence was in Mevaseret Zion. I didn't tell her what Mevaseret Zion means, the view of Jerusalem. And actually from my apartment, I could see Jerusalem every day. I could see all the beautiful places of Jerusalem. And I was only 5 minutes away from the capital, which made my life a lot more simpler than those fellows who are in Tel Aviv or in Herzliya, and they have to have a long drive. Now I understand they can do it in train a lot faster to go do their jobs at the capital. And so it is something that works like that. Now, when we had the Civil War, let's go back to my father in the Civil War, is that, well, he was the chaplain. And as chaplain, one of his duties, sad duties, was burying and giving the solemn rites for the dead to the dead people of our army and also of the national army, which we were fighting. And he carried as a sociologist, he made very important records in which it was counted that there were 3,500 people dead, more or less. Of those, 3,000 were government army people and irregulars from a communist army that was supporting them, and also people from our irregular National Liberation Army. Now, these numbers are really terrible. During the Civil War, which lasted, I repeat, a month and a half, Archbishop Sanabria and other people in Costa Rica did all efforts to try to reach a ceasefire. Now, ceasefires, as Israelis know, is something that is also imposed on you. It's something you don't do because you want to. A ceasefire usually is imposed on you when you are winning. And so actually in Costa Rica, there was interest to make a ceasefire that would, Bishop Sanabria came to the town of Santa Maria Edota to tell them, here, I have bought safe passages for you and your officers to go to Panama or wherever you want and carry on with your lives. So Don Pepe took Bishop Sanabria to the cemetery of Santa Maria and said to him, Your Holyship, we cannot accept your offer because my commitment is with the people who are here in the cemetery. And I'm not going to give up the Civil War because the Civil War is not only because of the fraud that was committed in the elections, but it's also about a lot of changes that have to be done in Costa Rica. And among them, we have to strengthen the social security and the commitments of the Costa Rican government for Costa Rican people. And this is something which is part of our program. So we're not going to stop. Now, a few weeks after that, because things happened very quickly during the Civil War, there was a big combat being carried out, and all of a sudden the diplomats, a car of diplomats filled with ambassadors, comes to visit us to visit Don Pepe. So they have to cross the enemy lines and come to visit him and come to look for Don Pepe in his general headquarters. And at that moment, there was a big battle going on. And actually, the big battle was not being won by our people. It was the first time that our people were beginning to see their people die, because during the rest of the Civil War, it was in the mountains. And, we had the high ground to our advantage. And it was something that it was beginning to change the view of it. Now, this time, Don Pepe, when he receives the ambassadors, it was the ambassador of the Holy See, the nuncio, it was the ambassador of the United States, the ambassador of Chile, the ambassador of Panama, and the ambassador of Mexico. They come and they tell Don Pepe, we are here on behalf of the whole diplomatic corps, and we have come to invite you to come to the Embassy of Mexico, where the government has accorded to meet with you to reach an agreement. So Don Pepe, while he was at that, his people came in and whispered to him in his ear, and they were telling him about the bad things that were happening in the battle. But he would just bluff, and he looked at the ambassador and said, "I'm sorry, my men, they want to march on San Jose now because we are doing very well in battle, and they want to, and they are eager to go combat and go to battle." And that's the way he bluffed to the ambassadors. And he said, "But I am going to commission an ambassador, plenipotentiary ambassador, to go to negotiate the peace in San Jose and in the embassy. You just give me all the guarantees." And so he called Father Benjamin Nunez and asked him to go. He knew he was a good negotiator because he was a union leader, and he knew that he was also schooled. He was among the most schooled of the people in Costa Rica, among the best intellectuals in Costa Rica, and sent him alone without any team or everything to negotiate. And my father took with him just his breviary, prayer book, and left his 45 automatic in his quarters, and went with the ambassadors, and did this for over a week of going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to the negotiating table. But before he left, Don Pepe gave him a very important instruction, the only instruction he gave him. He said, "Don't come back if you don't bring the total surrender of the government. Total and unconditional surrender." With that simple instruction, my father left. And when he was there, he found that actually the government, the people in government, they were more interested in being allowed to leave Costa Rica to Nicaragua to exile, and instead of being negotiating other details. And so that was easy. But the communist part, the communist irregulars, they were the only ones fighting for ideals. So they wanted written strong commitments by the Costa Rican government. They even wanted to have participation in the new government. And so my father just looked at Mr. Manuel Mora, the chief of the communists, and told him, "Look, I cannot negotiate such a thing. If I negotiate such a thing and I appear in Cartago, Don Pepe will have me shot. So let's do something. Let's meet. Why don't you come with me, or you will meet somewhere in near Cartago, but alone. Listen to this. Alone, unarmed, and we meet in secret in Mount Ochomolgo in no man's land." Don Manuel, who was a very brave man and had known my father for many years in the union strifes in Costa Rica, said to him, "I am willing to do it. And if Don Pepe says it's okay," my father tells him, "Tonight, listen to the radio that in our radio in Cartago, and if at 10 o'clock you hear the notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and we say the word carretera, carretera, road, road, then you come and we meet in Costa Rica, a small country like Israel, And so the mobility was possible even despite of the war, and thus it happened. And Don Pepe, my father, left Carthago when they came to the border, to the controls. The Costa Rican soldiers wouldn't want them to go past them, but Don Pepe told them, Father Benjamin and I are going to see some girls over on the other side. And so they went by, and they drove their jeep a little bit up the hill, and they went up the road. And meanwhile, Don Manuel had come with an aide, a driver, and another combat officer of the Communist Party. And there they met, and they came to an agreement. And that is known as the Pacto de Ochomogo. Out of that Pacto de Ochomogo, we managed to settle a peace. We managed to settle an agreement. We managed to stop the war. And this is very significant, because if the war would have gone on, the communists were willing to fight for the capital by taking the tanks of liquor production, which is very important for the fiscal maintenance of Costa Rica, and pour the tanks of alcohol in San Jose, and make big fires and fight house by house, door by door. And this is something that would have been tragic, because the amount of dead people, instead of 3,500, could have gone, we don't know, 30, 60, 50,000 people, we don't know. And Don Pepe, on the other hand, had the idea of making a pincer movement with his army over San Jose. So the battle would have been intolerable. It would have changed Costa Rican's history. The important thing is that by doing this agreement, they managed to build a Costa Rica where the first thing that we did was abolish our army in order to face an invasion. And in this, and I say this, and this is very important, because while that is happening in Israel, you have your own problems. And Don Pepe was very on his mind the changes that were going on in the world. I'm talking about 1948, after World War, in a moment when you are fighting, when the Indians are fighting, when everybody is trying to change the world. So, of course, there was a certain sympathy, a very important admiration to other great leaders. And Don Pepe was always very, gave great importance of our relation with other great leaders in the world. And of course, David Ben-Gurion was among the most important of this. Father Benjamin Nunez, on his other hand, among his books, there is a very important book, which is called From Mount Zion from the Irazu volcano, which is the slopes of the volcano we live in here, and where he was born on the other side of the slopes. And so from the Irazu volcano to Mount Zion, that's the name of his book. It's a very important book, because it is a little bit like the report to Greco by Nikos Kazantzakis. It is like an intellectual biography of my father. And especially what it most deals with is that, since my father being a Catholic priest, how he sees the problem of anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism in the Catholic Church during history. And it's a very, very deep book. In the book, in the PDF I sent Lowell yesterday, if he manages to open, which I'm sure he will because it's made in Israel. If you take it on one side, it is, let me show it to you. I have the only printed copy that exists. You see, this is on the one side. El cura amigo. This is on the other side. If you open it on this side, it reads like a regular book in Spanish. If you open it the way we do in Israel, it starts here and it's all in Hebrew. And it has very important things. It has in it, there's an introduction by the president of Israel, by Shimon Peres. And it has certain articles and introductions by different Israelis. And it has a selection of parts of the book from the erosion volcano to Mount Zion. And it has also the translation of the most important speeches my father made at the United Nations. Because later in his life, after the peace agreements, he was sent as ambassador to the United Nations, where he served for some years. And his main struggle was struggling against colonialism, which was the big thing in Israel, in the world. And in this, it's interesting, among the things that he did was fight diplomatically for the independence of Algeria. So it's interesting because here you have the big Jewish defender fighting for Algeria, and because he was fighting against colonialism. The French were pressing Costa Rica, offering money to Costa Rica in order for us to support the independence of, to support French colonialism. And but my father, when he was called on the phone by President Figueres and by the foreign minister of Costa Rica to support the French in the resolution, he told them, look, right now I'm going to vote for independence. If you want, as you can, just ban me and fire me. But I will be in 2 days in Costa Rica explaining why you fired Father Benjamin Nunez. So things went quiet. The vote of Costa Rica stayed the way it was, and it was won by independence. So this is the kind of person my father was. As you will see in the speeches I sent Lowell, his struggle for Israel was constant. During many years, even when he was not ambassador to the United Nations, the foreign ministers of Costa Rica would send every General Assembly, they would send my father to serve at the United Nations, aiding the ambassador and speaking on defense of Israel. This was in the old days, and it was something that was done regularly. And we had to do it in every General Assembly. And sometimes he would meet with Ambassador Baroudi, the ambassador of Saudi Arabia, who respected him very much and called him Monsignor. And he would call Ambassador Baroudi. And Ambassador Baroudi was used to looking at crazy Costa Ricans, because also when the vote came on the partition of Israel, Ambassador Baroudi was also trying to press Costa Rica to vote against partition. And this is in the book Exodus of, there is a very important pages where the vote is taking place. And it says how the representative of Costa Rica, which was not my father, which was the vice minister of foreign affairs at that time, just sat down after the voted in favor, and he smiled at Barudi, and and that's the way diplomacy is done at the United Nations. But now it's interesting because when my father was at the United Nations, he didn't know it, but actually he was being watched by the Arabs. But he didn't know that when he had to head home late at night, there would be usually one or two Israelis taking care of him on their way back, unnoticed, unknown. But this is something we came to know after years when we came back to Israel. So sometimes I have trouble knowing when I come back, if I come back to Costa Rica or if I come back to Israel. But it is something, that thing that we have when you love two countries. It's you're torn between two countries. Now, going back to my father again, the important thing in him is that he spent his life doing these sort of things, and was very important in establishing our relation with Israel. In our relation with Israel, there was a time when all the Latin American embassies were in Jerusalem, except Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil, which always kept their embassies in Tel Aviv. This is because they are the big ones and they always have believed to staying aloof from these things. But the rest of the Latin American countries, all of them had their embassies in Jerusalem. And this is something which I like to stress. It's very important because in international law, the factor of recognition is very, 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 very important. If recognition, when you recognize something as a reality, as a country, that recognition in international law, according to the Montevideo Convention of 1933, I believe it is irrevocable. Once you have recognized another country or some quality of that country, there is no way that you can revoke that recognition. Recognitions are forever, like diamonds. And besides this, besides being irrevocable, it is also retroactive. If you make a recognition today, for instance, the United States has recognized Jerusalem as the embassy, it is also retroactive. It also affects all your past decisions. That is the essence of international relations. And this is something I like to stress very much, because also an important thing to bear in mind is that Costa Rica has a very particular view of our foreign policy. Our foreign policy is based on national interests, which are the base. On it, we have two columns, two straight columns. One is our struggle for the human rights, the defense of human rights all over the world. And the other one, the defense of democracy. Over that, we have principles. And the most important of these principles is the keystone, which is our belief in international law. This is very important, because when we have a belief in international law, it means that we are believing in something which is a fiction. Because international law, there is not such a thing as law, because there is nobody to make it go. And as international law is a fiction, but however, it's something that exists. It's there. You have the Penal International Court. You have the International Court of Justice. And you say, is it that they make decisions and nothing happens? Why? Because countries won't follow through. So if we're believing and setting all our security, because since we don't have an army, it means that all our security is based on international law. It is like taking us blindfold, put it on our eyes, and walking on something that does not exist to get to the other side. And that is the particular dilemma of Costa Rica's foreign policy. Now, when we make this foreign policy and we have this belief in our recognitions, we know that what we recognize, it's recognized. What I'm trying to say is that no matter what we say or wherever we have the embassy, Jerusalem is the capital, the eternal capital of Israel. And I can say that also for the rest of the Latin Americans, who today they don't say it, but according to the Montevideo Treaty, since they once recognized Jerusalem as the capital, it is the capital. For instance, all ambassadors, I was saying a while ago, whether they live in Herzliya or they live wherever, because the decision by the Security Council to ask ambassadors to pull their embassies out of the Holy City doesn't mention Jerusalem. It mentions the Holy City. What is the Holy City? No, there's not a limit for the Holy City. So Meva said it is excluded from the Holy City, I would say. And so are other places I know in Jerusalem, which are not holy at all. And but that's the way the Security Council established it. And besides that, you will find that all the ambassadors, whenever there is a visiting statesman, and the visiting statesman is invited to address the Knesset. The Knesset doesn't meet in Tel Aviv just to, so the president or chief of state or chief of government comes. The Knesset sessions in Jerusalem. And that's where they come. That's where Sadat came. That's where anybody who wants to address the Knesset must come to, because that's where the seat is. And so is it recognition for the ambassadors of all the countries to come to the Knesset? Whenever once a year, ambassadors are invited to say hello to the president of Israel near my old house in Jerusalem, in Beit Hanassim. They all drive up and go into Beit Hanassim, and they're all there. That is a recognition. There is not one single ambassador in Israel of any country whatsoever, even those that are now arriving and coming from countries in the Middle East. They all have to present their credentials if they want to be ambassadors in Jerusalem. I mean, the president is not going to receive them in Tel Aviv, is he? So they all come to Jerusalem, and coming to Jerusalem, what does it mean? It's a recognition with irrevocability and also with retroactive effects on whatever decision those countries do. And here I'm talking about, because the only place I've seen with such a big diplomatic corps has been in Havana. After being in Israel, I was punished and I was sent to Cuba as ambassador. I say I was punished because I was in the war, in the summer war, with all the missiles coming in from Hamas. Costa Rican journalists would call me and I would tell them my vision of the way we were being attacked, of the way we had to go 17, 18 times a day to the shelters, of the way children were affected, of the way that they were shooting. Once I remember, I called a friend from the Mucata of Chilean origin, and I told him, "You are attacking Costa Rica because you have missiles being shot at our embassy." And they didn't like me when I said those things. Well, somehow or other, once my foreign minister called me, I am a career ambassador, so they couldn't just fire me. And it tells me, I am just coming out of the presidential house, and the president would like me to ask you if you would be willing to be moved to Havana. So I told him, the foreign minister, look, I doubt. I'm a career diplomat, and I go wherever you tell me. I'm obedient, but I doubt that they will give me my placet. And actually, it took them about 3 months to give me my placet. And any diplomat knows that if your placet is not in within 1 month, they better look for another diplomat. However, my foreign ministry insisted, and finally they received me in Cuba, and I spent some time in Cuba. I spent 2 years. Then I decided to retire, and here I am in your house. This house is in a farm, which is, the name is Yad Ha'el. My father, as a priest, called it the Hand of God, and it is a small farm, and we like to see it as a kibbutz, as a family kibbutz, or more of a moshav. But it's a very important thing. Those little things in diplomacy of what recognition actually means are very important to bear in mind. Now that so many countries are recognizing Israel, and now that some are taking the brave decision that for a time only Costa Rica was the one that disobeyed the Security Council. Why did we disobey the Security Council? Well, on the one hand, you had the pressure of my father here in Costa Rica, but also our first ambassador to Israel had been President Luis Alberto Monge, who was acting president, who was the president when the decision came. So President Monge just decided to move the embassy back to Jerusalem. Actually, the ambassador, the president who received the orders, he did order to move the embassy to Tel Aviv. But the ambassador we had then, just, he hanky-pankied on it. And he took this, was sending measurements. I'm looking for a place. And they sent the budgets, and they were very high budgets, and nobody could pay for that in Costa Rica. And finally, he decided to return because he wanted to retire. He wasn't a career ambassador. He wanted to go back to teaching and other things. And so they sent a career diplomat as chargé d'affaires to move the embassy. And he did move it. But 6 months after that, we had the election, and President Monge's first decision was to move the embassy back to Jerusalem. And we kept it there. That's when I met Lowell. At that time, the Salvadorians had also joined us. In fact, it's interesting. But I don't know if still, but when I was there last time, the ambassadors the Salvadorians still kept the residents in Jerusalem. I don't know now, but little details like that are important in the presence of ambassadors, in the presence of what an ambassador means, of what the presence of an ambassador at certain things means. What did this give us in Costa Rica? A lot. For instance, I remember that when President Clinton came to Jerusalem, there was a big dinner, and not everybody was invited. The only ambassadors there present were, of course, the United States, of course, Russia, and of course, Egypt, and but the only two small ones that were there was El Salvador and Costa Rica. We were there because we had our embassies in Jerusalem. Where you have an embassy is very important. Now, I must stress something also on this, and it's that an embassy doesn't mean much either. It's everything, but it doesn't mean much. Because there is no such thing in international law that requires that a capital has to have international recognition. No. A capital is where you have the power and the might to establish it and keep it there for time. Now, it's interesting because when you look at the way the International Court of Justice handle things, is that they usually say, they don't say having possession of a territory they don't say 30 years, they don't say 80 years, they say for a certain time. So a certain time might vary, but that's the way the diplomats and international law has a very shady and dark way of handling things. I would like to express something also, which I'm certain my father would have enjoyed very much. And it is when we look at all the items that my father in this book takes care of. One of the things that's interesting here is that he also worries for the well-being and rights of Arab Israelis and of Palestinians. But he just calls for negotiations, for finishing negotiations, or for being present at negotiations in his time. He had great hopes that someday things could improve. And now we are in the phase of new things because actually the Middle East has changed. The Abraham Accords, even if the president who imposed the Abraham Accords as well as the Great Deal is no longer president. But that's the other thing about diplomacy. When a country, and especially a big country, does something, it changes things. And when things are changed, nothing will ever be the same again. If you wanted to study Middle East politics, the first thing you had to know were the 3 no's of Khartoum. They don't exist anymore. And they don't exist since very little ago. Now I'm retired as a professor also, but sometimes I write to my students and I have to tell them, well, look, whatever I taught you in this has nothing to do anymore. It doesn't exist. What's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. But it depends on the people of Israel. It depends on the people of Israel. When I said people of Israel, I'm talking about all the Israelis. I'm talking also about the neighbors, what's going to happen. I don't know. Look what I'm reading now. The 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights, the full version. This is a translation to Spanish by Vicente Blasco Ibáñez, one of the greatest Spanish writers. And it's a fascinating book because in it you find references to Judaism, you find references to traditions of Judaism, you find a lot of things which actually it's something that has been there all the time. So I don't know where we were going to go. And I just wanted to tell you about this man, Father Benjamin Nunez. He was a peasant. He was born in a mountain town, Pacayas. His father was a blacksmith. And as a little kid, he had to go bring herds of horses to the blacksmith store and take them back, and had to be working in the plantings of his father. And until he decided, he didn't decide, but the church, the Catholic Church, is something fascinating. The Catholic Church, the priest noticed that the little kid who helped in the Mass, Father Benjamin Nunez, and his brother, who was distinguished in cooperativism in Costa Rica, he lived in Israel too, were brilliant kids. Brilliant kids, but very poor. So what did the priest do? Send them to study in the seminary. And being at the seminary directors and the bishops gave attention, and they sent them, especially Father Benjamin Nunez, to do their graduate work at American universities. It's interesting, they didn't send them to Europe. They sent them to the United States. And you will find in the book a lot of pictures, very nice pictures, you see? In the middle, where it divides this is a building which is the Ministry of Labor in Costa Rica, and it's called the Father Benjamin Nunez Building. And there is a street in Jerusalem with my father's name, Comer Benjamin Nunez. It's a small street. It's about a block long, but it's a street in Jerusalem. I remember when I was speaking to the mayor of Jerusalem, and he was telling me that they were looking for a street to put my father's name. I just stared at him and told him, Mr. Mayor, why, I have the street that you can name. Did King George change his name? Of course, he laughed like I am laughing. And I think my father deserved it more than King George. Well, that's what I can tell you. If you have any questions, I'll be very glad to try to answer them.
That's
wonderful.
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely incredible.
I made a few notations.
As a question, was your mother very supportive of your father?
Was my mother what?
Was she very supportive? Was your mother very? Did she support your father, and was she also very pro-Israel and pro-Jewish?
Well, my mother, she was another story. I have the plan. Now that my mother passed away, passed away when I was living in Nueva Edición. Now that she passed away, I want to write their life story as a novel.
Wow.
It'll have to be a novel because there are certain details, of course, I was never told as a child. But a friend of mine, an ambassador from the United States, told me to write it as a novel and sell the movie rights to Hollywood, and we'll have my life settled. And because my mother was a very interesting woman, beautiful woman. And when she met my father, well, she had a problem that she was a rich widow. And being a rich widow, when she met Father Benjamin Nunez, the inevitable thing happened. They fell in love. And it's a real interesting love story because he was a priest and he was not allowed to,
Right.
to have any romantic relation. Today, I am a great enemy of abortion because I was never told this, but I believe that some old hag and somebody must have probably insinuated to my parents to just abort me.
Wow.
And carry on with their lives. Definitely, well, I'm here, and they had a lot of tough decisions to take. When the bishop received some ladies who went to with the complaint that Father Benjamin Nunez had fathered a child. The bishop was a very brilliant bishop and loved my father too much. He said, Father Benjamin Nunez is not the gentleman who will abandon his lady. End of story. Since then, it's interesting because all the priests in Costa Rica know my story. I don't carry my father's name. I carry the last name of my mother's husband, who had died 2 years before I did, or before I was born. That's a little bit posthumous. And but later in life, being in New York, they had to face Cardinal Spellman and also the intrigue of certain people in Costa Rica. And this took to a big struggle, a big fight. And in this big fight, Father Nunez received a proposal by Don Pepe Figueres and other leaders of our political party, which told them, Father Benjamin Nunez, let's do this. We are moving you from the New York City, from the United Nations, to be ambassador in Uruguay. Uruguay was a very secular country. There, you will give up your priesthood and you will marry Daisy and be there for a few years. Once the scandal is over here, you come back to Costa Rica and we make you president of Costa Rica.
Wow. Sure.
He was very happy with the idea. And he came with the idea. And he was willing to send his cassock back to his archbishop. But my mother was a very wise lady. And she said to him, Benjamin, my love, if there is one thing that is not going to happen, is that the Catholic Church has existed for nearly 2,000 years, and it has never lost a battle. It's not me, Daisy Jota Viuda de Carreras, who's going to win that battle. So she gave up. She didn't give the battle. They went on. The Cardinal Spellman and my father's then bishop, which was a new bishop in Costa Rica, his friend had passed away, ordered him never to see her again, to kick her from his house in New York. That was the order. Only problem is that the church didn't know that the house belonged to my mother, because my mother was rich the salaries of Costa Rican diplomats have never been very good. So it's actually my father who had to go live in a monastery. And well, but with time, things went back to normal, and we went on having our lives. And here I am. This is the house that used to belong to my father. And well, but my mother was a great woman. She was the widow of an entrepreneur and had a very interesting life all over Latin America, like the kind of things that you can see in black and white movies when movies were actually movies.
Wow. Okay, so we're going to open up for questions. Prof, if you want to ask something, or David, or Lau, anybody has any comments, or?
Yeah, I do. I'll pose them, and then you can react one after the other. I fell in love with Costa Rica because the reports of my nieces who love to travel there, and also Oscar Arias. I really looked up to him as a kind of model for what a progressive leader might be for Latin America, especially after he won the Nobel Prize in 1987, I believe it was, for bringing some kind of peace to Central America, which we still live with. On a personal note, you lost your wife, Marta. Any of the children follow you in diplomacy?
No, actually not. Maybe one of my grandchildren live, two of them here. There's another one that lives in Washington, and I don't know what she'll do.
Okay.
But she's gonna do something, I'm certain. But she's very small still, and but they still haven't come to that stage. My son is a pilot, and my daughter is an educator. She lives in Washington D.C. and she works in a school where she is a specialist in education for gifted and talented. But actually, she's more in the financing of the school as a fundraiser, and that's what they do. They don't know. They didn't get interested in these type of things.
In Costa Rica, was the country part of that movement for independence that began with the Mexican Revolution of 1811? Would you say?
Actually, it didn't follow it. It was something interesting. Our independence, Costa Ricans did not fight for our independence because Costa Rica
handed to you.
No, Costa Rica was perhaps the exception, and one of the things that characterize Costa Rica is the difference of our independence movements and our development. Costa Rica was the last country to be in Latin America to be settled. It was the last one to be conquered, because the Indians in Costa Rica were very very strong, very rebellious, and they weren't very many, but they were very, very, very difficult to conquer. And there were great resistance to the Spaniard conquest. So, but most of them died by repression, and also by the diseases that the Spanish brought to Latin America, and particularly to Costa Rica. Costa Rica is an isthmus. Being an isthmus, it's interesting. I always like to tell people that all the people in South America, at some time or other, their ancestors moved through Costa Rica.
Mhm.
And Costa Rica, actually, it's interesting. One of the things that we are very underdeveloped is our archaeology. We have found a few good, important archaeology sites, especially one in Turrialba, which is actually a temple area. Not big pyramids, but it's more the kind of settlement where you can see the streets and the disposition of it, and it's something very different, but it does show a certain relationship with South American Indians of Colombia. In fact, my father, among his great worries in life, was if we were Jewish. He was told that Nunez was a Jewish last name. But then he was very sad when they told him that no, not all Nunez, especially those from Mexico. But he was very happy when he knew that our Nunez family came from Colombia, particularly from Antioquia, Colombia, where there is great knowledge of Jewish families. The thing is, the tradition didn't come, and genetically, who knows? But it's very, very difficult to know. But definitely, there is something in Costa Rica's relationship, because if you look at the first flag of Costa Rica, unfortunately, I don't have one here, which I can show you easily. I have, but in some book. And it was the first flag of Costa Rica after the Mexican and the Spanish flags, who were the original flags, was a white flag with a red Star of David in the middle.
Really?
A red solid Star of David in the middle. Why? Nobody knows. But it is known that the people who came to settle Costa Rica from Nicaragua, from Granada, Nicaragua, there is a story about a group of settlers who came who were Sephardic Jews, and they were coming to settle Costa Rica. And they did come. And Costa Rica, another thing that it has in its history, which makes doubts in if this is so or not, there's a lady writing some art on this, and but it is among the things that happened in Costa Rica was that 2 times in our history, the Archbishop of Costa Rica, which was the one of León, Nicaragua, excommunicated the whole population of Costa Rica. He excommunicated the whole population of Costa Rica because the whole population of Costa Rica did not like to live in the cities or in the towns. They liked to live dispersed in the mountains, rather wildly. And they had rights which nobody understood. So there is something. There is something. I like to think there is.
Yes, I'd like to add something here. Fascinating talk. And you know I'm going to ask you about Jurassic Park, which I did 8 years ago.
Yes.
I have other questions and comments, but I'll hold them until I'd like to have an update on Jurassic Park and the island and the velociraptors, if I may. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the island, there are several islands in Costa Rica. None of them is Jurassic Park. The most important island that we have is the island of Coco's Island. which is far off from our land, but it has a very important relation to Costa Rica. And it is that when we look at Cocos Island, there's always been a fabled treasure supposed to have been buried there by Bloody Morgan and other pirates, but nobody has ever found it. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt came to Cocos Island when he was Undersecretary of the Navy to look for the treasure. I understand he didn't find it. Nobody has found it. But that's because the true treasure is the island. It is a beautiful island, 24 square kilometers. And it has water, it has its own fresh water, which made it a very important basis. And actually, President Roosevelt, as being Undersecretary of the Navy, thought about making a naval base there and another one in continental Costa Rica. It was in the area between the two wars. But we don't have any dinosaurs or anything to that. But our islands are very important because this Cocos Island, what does produce for Costa Rica is that gives Costa Rica actually huge proportions in our size. Costa Rica is a country which is 50,000 square kilometers in our size, in our territory. With this island, 24 kilometers more, and so far away, and thanks to international law again, it gives us a big circle about it of territorial waters and exclusive economic zone, which actually gives Costa Rica a size which is 11 times the territory of our land in sea. Now, there's a problem. Costa Ricans, we don't have marine culture. When you come here to Costa Rica and you go to a restaurant, you find 2 or 3 types of fish. It's not like in Chile where you get the sea menu and there are so many things to choose that you don't even know they existed in sea. And that's because our sailors are actually not deep water sailors. So one of the menaces and threats that we have in Costa Rica to our sovereignty are ships, especially Chinese ships, that come, and our Coast Guard is not strongly equipped to detect them and stop them, and they affect our ecoculture very much. And well, that's more or less what I can say on the islands.
Yeah, we have a question from the chat, one of our regular participants, Professor Samish Based from Metro Detroit, ecological sociologist, environmental, but he's asking, what is your opinion of President Arias, Nobel Peace Prize winner, who first recognized the state of Palestine in the late 1980s? And I'm not super familiar with the history he's mentioning, if you want to give us the backdrop on that.
Yes, President Arias is our Nobel Prize winner because actually he did make a very important proposal in international politics in a moment when it was a very important moment from the history and sociology and the Latin American schools and international relations schools all over the United States. The amount of publishings that you had on Central America was fabulous. And everybody was writing about Central America because we were going to have a generalized war, one against all others. And there were two schools of thought. One, that it was due to internal structural problems of our own, and the other, that it was all a projection of the Cold War. And actually, it was a mixture of both things. Actually, it was a mixture of both things, because something that Costa Rica had something to do with it, which is the Cuban Revolution. And the Cuban Revolution came, Fidel Castro was struggling against dictators. Costa Rica, immediately after 1948, dedicated itself in diplomacy to struggle against dictatorships in Latin America. And it was all Latin America that was, people used to talk about something called the International of the Swords, thinking of the military swords. Well, all sorts of military, but I'm talking about the sabers that officers use. And it was the International of the Sabers, which was something that what Presidents Esperón, many dictators all over Latin America, Trujillo, Batista, etc. And they all followed an international, which had some backing also from Franco. It's very complex. It's very, very complex. But in this struggle, one thing that Costa Rica did was that from Costa Rica, and there are very important books on it, we managed to send to Cuba, to Fidel Castro in the Sierra Maestra. We sent them plane loads, 2 plane loads of caliber 50 machine guns and other weapons for them to struggle against Batista. And when I say we, it was President Figueres who did this in order to help. In fact, once I went as a diplomat, I was vice foreign minister, and I had to represent President Figueres, his son, to a meeting in Cartagena de Indias for the founding of the Caribbean Association of States. And because of alphabetical order, I had to be all the time next to Fidel Castro. So I said, oh my God, now what am I going to speak about Fidel Castro? So the only thing I could tell him was that I had helped pack the weapons that we sent to him. Wow. He immediately went to and was saying how if we had not sent those weapons to him, he would have been destroyed in the Sierra Maestra. How we managed to change history. When I told this to people in Cuba, they weren't very happy with me. They said, so you are the ones who are culprit of the thing. The thing is that we, for different reasons, 1 year after that, Jose Figueres was kicked out of Cuba because he showed up in a celebration of the revolution. I told President Castro that the things that he was doing, the shooting of people, the executions, and his struggle against the United States was not right, that we had friends in the United States that could help in the Democratic Party and in the liberal sectors of the United States. Actually, they nabbed the microphone from Don Pepe and took him to the airport and put him back on his plane and sent him to Costa Rica. Eventually, we broke off relations with Cuba because of the executions and protests in Costa Rica against it. This is very important to bear in mind. However, the other thing that we did is that we had very strong relationships with Taiwan. The strong relationship with Taiwan, of course, impeded us from having a relationship with communist China. We had wonderful relations with them, as we had with South Korea. It was criticized at the time because both South Korea and Taiwan were dictatorships. And however, they said that some people simplify, say, Costa Ricans do it for the money, for the help that they get. Unfortunately, no. When we established that relationship with Taipei and with South Korea, though they were very poor countries, that they became very rich. Okay, they became very rich, and they helped us then. And this is very important, as you will see. Now,
you're making me think of you're making me think of what they call the Netanyahu or Modi doctrine with the Indian Israel diplomacy in the question of China, where Netanyahu said that he will do diplomacy with China as regardless of the situation between India and China, that they would do independent diplomacy. And then Modi flipped back and flipped the Netanyahu doctrine on Palestine. They called the Modi doctrine, that India will do diplomacy with Palestine independent of their diplomacy with Israel. And I guess, you know, that's kind of what you're saying, or you're facing.
It's kind of, but you'll see it has more to do with your question. And so when President Arias was my dissertation director at the University of Costa Rica. He was my teacher. And I was his director of foreign policy during his first government. And during his first government, which was when we established the peace plan for Latin America, for Central America, it was a very important peace plan. Actually, the peace plan of Arias was not what was approved. But however, the peace plan of Arias established timetables on how the different sectors that were in struggles in each of the Central American countries would have to start conversations to achieve peace, etc. It is very, very complex, but it had to do with that. It had to do, and also on how to put out or lessen the military assistance received from Russia by some, or from the Soviet Union, and from the United States by others. Well, the peace plan was gave timetables and everything for that. I had to travel very much also all over Central America, trying to convince them of those struggles. At the time, we were being sued by Nicaragua because the Nicaraguan contras would operate from Costa Rica. Since we don't have an army, we couldn't control them, and they would from Costa Rica make attacks in the southern front, and also from Honduras, from the northern front of Nicaragua. These were things that also threatened peace and were actually threatening on creating a generalized war in Central America, which is what we mainly wanted to avoid.
Just to mention, because the professor who asked the questions, backgrounds, sociology, environmental, and he wanted to praise Costa Rica for its tremendous work in creating the first biodiversity regions, making them off track in major oil drilling.
Yeah, this comes before. This comes with President Daniel Oduber, some 8 years before that. And President Daniel Oduber, one of the great things that I did was to establish, and it has to do with Cocos Island, with your dinosaurs, established that more than half of our country is national parks. And this was President Daniel Rivera who settled that policy. And it's actually part of our national interest in our international policy. Uh, but now going back to President Arias, when President Arias makes this big effort, we end up with a big meeting. There were a lot of meetings there. I can show you whole books on with all the conferences, all the meetings of Contadora, the Contadora process, and the Contadora and the support group process. And everybody was trying to get into the business. To give you an idea, the foreign minister of Venezuela at that time, before the actual government in Venezuela, complained to our foreign minister that due to Central America, 80% of the work of his foreign ministry was dedicated to Central America. Can you think that about, I'm talking about Venezuela, a big country. And actually, it was distracting everybody. It was a big, big problem. And President Arias asked me one day, Rodrigo, I want you to go to, I know you're going to Nicaragua. When you are there, tell them that I'm willing to do anything to have them stop the demand against us in the national court, in the International Court of Justice. I did. This established a parallel dialogue because that's the way things worked. When there would be a meeting here, and it was rather like Casablanca, the meetings at the hotels and everything. You would find secret agents from all the countries in the world and everything. And there were some Mossad people there also. Everybody was looking at what was going to go in Central America. We were big then. And so finally they met in Guatemala. And when they met in Guatemala, there was one night where everything seemed to be going away. It was all going to stop. But President Arias did have one thing. He's a hard-headed guy. And he insisted on the presidents to go on meeting without their foreign ministers. And in the morning, they just called their foreign ministers that they had agreed on something. And they signed it, and they had peace. Now, actually, by then, President Arias had already received his Nobel Peace Prize. Because Nobel Peace Prizes, all of a sudden, those guys in Oslo decided that not to give peace prizes for something that was done, but as a stimulus to get something done. Or something like that happened in Israel too. And using the
and with
peace
Obama, with President Obama. With President Obama.
President Obama, that was nobody still understands it. I don't understand it. Now that I'm not a diplomat, I can say it. But during his government, there was not one single day that the United States was not in war. He had his bold surges in. He took the number of soldiers in Afghanistan to unparalleled numbers, etc. I don't know. Well, in any case, but yes, that's what I have in mind, and I don't think I'll ever get one big with those things I say. But in any case, the important thing was that it had been done. So ever since then, President Arias established like the Center for World Peace of Shimon Peres. He established something like that. You have to do something with the money, and it's nice to do noble things instead of just making something private with it. And it's become fashionable. And in his Center for Peace, he started doing a lot of studies and things And among this, when he manages to become president again, he decides to make three big changes in Costa Rican foreign policy. One, to not recognize, because it was recognized, and as I said, recognition is not withdrawable, we would reestablish relations with Cuba. Okay. I don't think he knew that was for punishing me a few years later. But in any case, it was one of the major announcements that he made. The other announcement was that we were going to break relations with Taiwan and establish them and recognize Communist China and establish relations with Communist China. Well, that was a big change. And the other one, that we would maintain our relations with Israel, pull our embassy from Jerusalem, and we moved it to Ramat Gan, and recognize and establish diplomatic relations with Palestine. It's interesting to mention that by then we had relations with Palestine. When I met Lowell, we had our embassy in Jerusalem, but we had already established a certain relationship with Palestine that very few people know about. Since I had been vice foreign minister, I knew about it. In Costa Rica, we had decided that in the cooperation business in the world, we were losing something very important. And it was, we were seen in the international community as a country with recipient of aid, recipient of foreign aid. That's very sad, you know. Costa Ricans, if we have one problem Costa Ricans have is we're very proud. We're very backwards. We have our pride. So President Jose Maria Figueres, who is right now my candidate to be president again of Costa Rica, decided with his foreign minister, my boss, decided, let's make a Costa Rican cooperation agency. Wow. What's a Costa Rican cooperation agency? It's something with which we can share our good practices with poorer countries that don't have a good practices. We have been receiving foreign aid and assistance from all the countries in the world, from many countries, especially from Holland, some from the United States, some from other European countries, a lot from Israel, I must say. And let's use, see, with that, what we have learned there, we're supposed to have learned something. So with what we know, let's make a cooperation agency. And we made the cooperation agency. And among those things we worked with in the cooperation agency was trying to teach the Haitians how to make elections. Was trying to export our election program to wherever needed that assistance in Central America and Latin America and in the Caribbean. And we worked at that very hard. Had some successes and some failures, because that's the way things are. Then we had another program which was sharing. We had something very important, which we still have, and it's actually helping us very much with this Chinese epidemic, the epidemic from Wuhan, because that's where it was born, or where it was designed, we don't know. And but something that has helped us there is our health system. And in our health system, in the Jose Maria Figueres, we had started something which is called the IBAIs, which is basic institutions that make, sometimes I would have somebody here knock my door and it's a doctor to see how I'm doing, to see how my health is, because I am above 70 years old. It's that type of medicine, preventive medicine. Mm-hmm. Okay. With that in mind, we had spoken with the Palestinians in Ramallah, and we had told them, we can help you. Okay, we have an embassy in Jerusalem, we're near Ramallah, but send us doctors and we will train them. Send us nurses and we will train them. Wow, that is something. I can send Lowell another YouTube I have there, which a talk I gave in Radio High a few days ago. It's in Spanish. That's a problem it has, which is another proposal that later, when I was ambassador, I made to Chairman Arafat. I told Chairman Arafat, Mr. Chairman, don't be a demilitarized country. Become a country like Costa Rica where you decide not to have an army, and we will teach you how to do it. And we started working on that. And we had all this going on in conversations from Jerusalem, our embassy, to Ramallah. Chairman Arafat just looked at me in that meeting. His lip was already trembling with Parkinson or whatever he had. And he said to me, Mr. Ambassador, I have a problem. If I don't have an army, what am I going to give work, job, labor to my thousands and thousands of young people? And I stared back to him and I said, Mr. Chairman, if you show up dressed in mufti at the General Assembly, and you say you are taking Costa Rica as example of making a country without an army by your decision, the amount of investment you're going to get from the world is going to be so big that you're going to have to get people from other Arab countries to come and work with you. Mm-hmm. He didn't believe me. But I must say, some of his ministers did. Later in visits I made to Gaza, I used to go very often to Gaza, and I was always fascinated that in Gaza, if I went to the West Bank, I would see all the Arabs there drinking their tea and playing backgammon, women working somewhere. And that's all I would see. But in Gaza, I would see people working with their little burros, pulling out their carts, going, I don't know where, doing what. But people were working. So I was always very faithful in Gaza. I even tried to establish, almost got it, representative office of Costa Rica to Gaza. And that would have been something nice, depending on my embassy in Jerusalem. Just getting that would have been a shutter-upper to those who criticized our embassy in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, well, in diplomacy, almost doesn't count. But the thing is, we had the effort going. We tried. So with President Arias, well, we got the relationship. They have an ambassador who is the ambassador in Washington, and now, excuse me, the ambassador at the United Nations who covers Costa Rica. So we don't actually see him. They're not here permanently, as they are in other countries like Nicaragua or Venezuela or whatever. But that's what happened there. President Arias somebody was talking about in our actual campaign now, we made a logo for President Figueres, which is a mixture between an F and a P. F for Figueres, P for President. And somebody asked in a chat, what does the P stand for? Peace? No. President Arias has the exclusive on peace. Nobody else can talk about peace. He thinks he owns peace. So he will always make things about it. The thing I think later President Arias took up on my proposal for a project to teach the Palestinians how to make a country without an army. And it's something we have there. There is an Israeli, leftist Israeli, of course, who helps me very much in that, Eddie Kaufman. And there are especially Palestinians and Arab Israelis, Mohammed Dajani, and other people who help me in that. But it's not working. It's not working because there is no peace, because I don't know, and I don't know what's going to happen with their election. But it's there because we know someday there were going to be a following day. So, but that's the story with the President Arias. He was a great president. He has been our president 2 times. He doesn't like President Figueres very much because President Figueres is about to be president for a 2nd time. And he wanted to maintain that exclusivity also.
Yes, I would like to add some comments at this point. First of all, it's so fascinating to hear everything you're saying. It's bringing back all sorts of memories to me. I was in the Spanish and Puerto Rican Day parades in New York as a child because my father's practice was in the South Bronx, mostly with, forgive my pronunciation, Jiberos who came up from the mountains of Puerto Rico after World War II to New York. And there were no lawyers there. They didn't have anyone. So he opened a practice on 149th Street and 3rd Avenue. His whole social life was built around his clients. And so at the age of 4 in 1960, I was in a gigantic open air Cadillac going down 5th Avenue with the abuelas, these gigantic grandmothers. That's just a personal note. Also have to apologize.
I have his book. You gave me his book.
I did?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yes, that's right. I have to get that on the internet. Abogado, 50 Years on the Street. Yes, it's not in the internet. Stories from his life. And as far as I know, because I heard them around the dinner table, they're true. So I have to apologize for the mistake I made about, I thought the Costa Rican Revolution was without violence, but I see from what you said that that isn't true.
Actually, it was very, very violent. 3,500 people killed in 1 month. It's very, very high.
That's
and out of 750,000 Costa Ricans that existed at the time. Now, it could have been worse without the peace of Ochomogo.
So that was 1 month. Israel in the 1948 lost 6,000 1 year.
Yeah.
So there's several comments I wanted to make related to what you said about Costa Rica wanting to help others. First of all, Cervantes said that there were 2 classes of people in the world, the haves and the have-nots. And I think he's right. So Maimonides, in his Law of Charity, and Les is much more of a Talmud. I mean, I didn't grow up religiously observant, but Les and David really know this stuff. I get mixed up. Tell me, he said, everyone has to give charity, even poor people. Why? Because everybody wants to feel they're giving something to somebody. So even if a person lives entirely on charity, you have to give it too. It's very good insight into psychology. Now, there's so many changes going on in the world so fast today on a spiritual level. I want to make note because it relates to what you're saying, Costa Rica, the Arabs. First of all, as far as I know, most of the people in Gaza come from Chechnya. They're Chechens. So they're different from in the rest of the land of Israel. That's one thing. Secondly, it turns out, according to the research of President Yitzhak Ben Zvi, and more recently Zvi Sinai, the founder of Sapiens Israel, that many, if not most, of the Arab tribes, clans, and families of the land of Israel are descended from Jews who never left, especially the Christian Arabs in the Galilee. And that also includes the Arabs who came in the 19th and 20th century. So you have a real Midsummer Night's Dream situation there. Now, sometimes these people were asked about it. Saib Erekat, who died recently, said, yeah, my family I have Jewish ancestry. Jibril Rabju. Mahmoud Abbas is called by Arabs. They make fun of him. They call him the Jewish Agency. They put little notes. No one put there on the door of his office because they all know this. The issue of Jewish origin is very touchy for the so-called Palestinian Arabs. In Yatir, south of Hebron, a lot of the worst terrorists come from tribes where they want to show the Arabs we're more Arab than you because everybody knows they're of Jewish ancestry. Those are small points. Now, about the world of the amazing changes going on in the world of the Spanish and speaking world, they're astonishing. The Jewish blood that went underground is surfacing. For example, in the Philippines, President Manuel Quezon gave thousands of visas to Jews. Why? Well, it's easy to look for superficial reasons, but I think something much deeper is going on there because there's a lot of Jewish ancestry in the Spanish-speaking world. He should be honored much more than he is. Castro, in 2010, shortly before his death, said to Ahmadinejad, you should stop denying the Holocaust. They suffered more than we did. Why does he make a statement like that? I suspect he was of converso origin. Then you have in Brazil, Macias and Cardoso, the president, vice president, said, yeah, we're of Jewish ancestry. Not enough. Jair Messias Bolsonaro, the president there is Jabotinsky with a kippah. His first name, Yair, is a hero from the Bible, and his middle name means Mashiach. So you have all this stuff. And then during World War II, Trujillo taking in the Jews in the Dominican Republic, Franco and his diplomats, if you could get across the 50,000, especially if you were Spanish, if you could show you're of Spanish origin, they couldn't give him back to Hitler. And then you have the famous people like the singer Enrico Macias and his son. They're proud to be of Jewish ancestry. They come to Israel a lot. There's a lot to talk about. I think I mentioned most of my points here, that there's a tremendous ferment now and people that you wouldn't think of it having an attraction to Jews in Israel, like you mentioned about your father, which cannot simply be explained because of, in quotation marks, interests into politics, economics. Something much deeper is going on there. That's what I just wanted to say.
Ambassador Mendez of Portugal, by the way, Ambassador Mendez of Portugal, who managed to siphon quite a few Jews through Portugal and into America.
I must say on President Castro,
yeah,
in Cuba, when I left Israel to go to Cuba, when I finally got my agreement and I was moved to Cuba, of course, one of the last things I did was go say goodbye to Shimon Peres. I had met Shimon Peres on my first trip to Israel, which I went as a young man with my father. And of course, he took me to Shimon Peres' office at the Labor Party. He was head of the opposition at that time, as he was very often. And I was fascinated with that man. And one of the things that fascinated me, he set his feet up on the desk and with his sandals, with his Israeli sandals, and wiggled his toes. That fascinated me. Besides so many other things in his personality, but that was part of his personality. He was young at the time. And so that's when I met him. And later, many, many other times. But so the last thing I had to do was go say goodbye to him. So I went to the Perez Center and met with him for quite a while. And he asked me something very hard. He asked me, Rodrigo, since you're going to be in Cuba, there were declarations by President Castro, which were very open for Israel. Of course, we have some relation with him. In fact, the fellow who handled all the Eichmann getting in Buenos Aires was very active, teaching them how to make citric operations in Cuba and other business operations. So they're not strangers to this. But he told me, tell President Castro that I would like to meet with him. Either he comes here or I go to Cuba, and we both, as ex-presidents, as former presidents, can have some interesting conversation. I was working on that. Actually, one of his children, one of his sons, was helping me very much. I had opened, because diplomatically it was impossible to get that opening. So I had to use a channel with the son. And we were working on that, but then unfortunately, both leaders died. But that happens. But there was the will to do it. And definitely, yes, President Castro and his family are of Jewish origin, and they recognize it.
Mm. I'm intrigued with your philo-Semitism of the Costa Rican people. And I want you to comment. A few years ago, I do a lot of public speaking on Greek Jews. I was invited to El Paso for a series of presentations to B'nai Zion there, the synagogue. Rabbi De Leon, very prominent, I learned. And in all these sittings, there were people who were coming to disclose their own connection to Judaism by way of anusim. Did you hear this phrase, anus? I began to be fascinated by this so much. I learned more from them than I imparted, I felt. Particularly moving was the story of one woman who almost broke down in tears to tell me, Professor, I recall my grandmother going into a closet on the eve of Yom Kippur. I get emotional just thinking about it, and pleading with God to forgive her for living a life as a Christian during the year, but inwardly she's Jewish. I wonder, did the Inquisition penetrate? Apparently, it might not have penetrated Costa Rica and the areas there, and whether there are any crypto Jews in Costa Rica. Can you comment on that?
Yes, it is very interesting. There is a fabulous conference by Juan Bosch. Juan Bosch was a former president of the Dominican Republic who lived in Costa Rica as an exile, as many Latin American presidents lived here as exiles, like the presidents of Venezuela and other places. But Juan Bosch said that Costa Rica was a country that we didn't have a Simón Bolívar, we didn't have San Martin, but we didn't have great dictators the way that other Latin American countries had. And we had a very different history. And part of that different history was that Costa Rica was very poor, since it was the remotest and furthest colony of the Spanish Empire. then that permitted us to develop a democracy in which Costa Rica, especially in the Central Plateau, instead of having big extensions of land, we had small landowners in which farms, 8, 20, 30 dunams, they had their neighbors, and their neighbors' children would work with them, and they would work with their neighbors. And we established a culture where in Costa Rica, for instance, a landowner will call his peones, he won't call them Moncho. He will say Don Moncho. Don, like the Don Ingenioso Hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha, is a nobiliary title. It is a special distinction. And Costa Ricans, we always speak to each other with that special distinction. Be it the president, or being a peon, or being somebody who puts some gasoline in your car. It's part of our being, and that comes particularly from that. Now, being a small country, actually this permitted us to grow in our mountains, and the Spanish Empire never got interested in dominating Costa Rica. It had been difficult for them to do it because our Indians were so difficult to conquer. But once established, the conquerors, they didn't have big mines to worry about, or big production about anything, or that was the San Luis Potosí things. No, that was not a problem for the king. Costa Ricans, there was somebody who was there, and actually they had to send things to Costa Rica instead of pulling things out of Costa Rica. So not even the Spanish Inquisition was very concerned with us. So the Inquisition in Costa Rica doesn't have the level of importance it has in the rest of Latin America. So in Costa Rica, it didn't operate like that. So maybe there was a little, the influence of the church is big, but the fact that the Masons societies in Costa Rica, some of the best known Masons were priests, and some of the best known intellectuals in Costa Rica were priests. And so Costa Rica was certainly a little bit aloof from the influence of the Inquisition, as we were aloof from the empire. That is why I said a while ago that we did not struggle for our independence. Independence was not an issue for Costa Ricans. We were loyal to the crown. Why? Because they didn't bother us. They were too far away.
Right.
There was a Capitan General of, we used to belong, it was Central America was one single administrative area of the Spanish Empire, but Costa Rica was too far away from Guatemala. So for us, the things that they had there, their ideas that came from France and from Europe, liberty and those things, they were too complex. We had to plant our things. We had little things to worry about. So when the Central Americans decided to have independence, you asked me a while ago about our relation with Mexican independence.
Right.
Yes, the Mexicans, they had established an empire. They wanted to establish an empire, the Agustin Iturbide Empire. And they sent an army to invite the rest of Central America to join the empire. Okay, the army was coming. But then also at the same time, the Spanish, the Guatemalans sent a message that they had decided with the Salvadorians that we would have independence, we would declare independence from Spain. And messages there didn't go by internet, came by horse.
Right.
Imagine. So when the news got here, the news had passed through Nicaragua. And in Nicaragua, they received the announcement and they changed it and they said, Nicaragua declares independence in the name of Nicaragua and Costa Rica from Central America. So we got all these confusing invitations here in Costa Rica, in Cartago, which was our capital at the time. And then our forefathers said, this is very confusing. And so they made our first constitution. And our first constitution, we called it the Act of the Clouds of the Day. Due to the clouds of the day, we will decide later. And due to the clouds of the day, we decided later. When there's an interesting thing inside the Costa Rica, because some Costa Ricans, the Costa Ricans from Alajuela and San Jose, were Republicans. They wanted to have a republic. While the ones in Cartago and in Heredia were more high-classed. That's from where President Arias is from. And they decided that, no, we want to have a monarchy. We want to establish a monarchy. And so let's adhere ourselves to the Mexican invitation. So we had our first civil war. And our first civil war was in Mount Ochomogo, precisely for years after that, 70 years ago. My father, Don Pepe, Don Manuel Mora, and Carlos Luis Fallas, a great writer of Costa Rica, met and they settled the end of the last civil war. How interesting. The place where we had our first civil war, which was won by the Republicans, when they were fighting that, the Iturbide Empire had ceased to exist. So they were fighting for something that did not exist. And in that same place, so many years after that, 70 years ago, we settled our last civil war. I think there's something there. I think there's something there which goes beyond human will.
Very nice.
Ambassador, can I just ask you, the book that was written in Spanish and Hebrew, is there any way that could be translated into English so it could get a wide appeal? Because it would be so incredible if it could be translated.
I sent the book to Lowell in a PDF, and he's welcome to print it or put it on your website or whatever.
Have you got it in English?
That would be good.
No, it's not in English. It's not in English. There are some translations of my father's speeches in English, which were done by a very nice lady, a friend of Lowell. I forget her name. She had translated some of the of my father's speeches, 2 of them, I think. I have them somewhere.
Because it's historic. It's not only, it's historic. It's actually a big part of, it's historic. It's really important. And these
yes.
are,
yes, it is.
It's part of Zionism and Jewish history and modern, you know, it's really important that people become more aware, because I think it's incredible. Your father was some, sure.
Yeah.
It was
maybe we could have it published in the United States and get somebody to translate it.
I'm I'm very superstitious about talking about things that I didn't do yet. So I'm making all sorts of notes related to all sorts of points you brought up. And I'd rather show people what I did after I did it rather than talking about it before I did it. I have such a long list, but I agree completely with Les. If I were the state of Israel or major Jewish organizations in the world, money isn't the issue. They've got the money. It's the vision, what you want to do with the money. Like you mentioned, the president of Costa Rica, who got $1 million for the Nobel Prize and wanted to do something positive with it. I would spend more time teaching young Israelis and young Jews, or old Israelis and old Jews, or anybody, about so many of the wonderful people around the world who did good things for Jews in Israel. Now, they do it a little bit. In the German colony, the streets are all named after people who helped Israel. That's good, but it's not enough. There's unfortunately, maybe because of Jewish history, you mentioned your father and his concern with anti-Jewish teachings and activities in the church historically. That's true. That the emphasis is more on, especially what's tonight, Yom HaZikaron. We remember those soldiers who fell in the war, people who fell as a result of terrorism. And then last week was Yom HaShoah. And then on the 9th of Av, usually in August, is the traditional date for remembering disasters. I would, without diminishing that, if I was running things, I would put more emphasis on remembering people who did good things for Jews or Israel, or anybody for that matter. And this is not an issue of money. They've got the money. It's an issue of, what's the word for it? You have to have the vision. You have to have the idea. Money isn't the problem. It's orientation, let's say. And so we will do, in our own small way, Les and I and our colleagues, what we can informally to help with that. I don't want to say any more than that, because then I'd be giving away some of the ideas I have in mind, that I might not do them. But your father, yourself, your father, and these are stories which, I don't know, I think there should be books, movies. Sometimes it's getting the ideas. Oh, I'll give you an example of how an idea did become a book. Schindler's List, the book. How did it start? According to the author who wrote it, he was shopping in California in a clothing store. And he was talking to the lady, and she, the lady who owned it, was started to tell him about this Schindler. And then he got interested. And from that came the book and then the movie, all because of a conversation in a clothing store in California. So I would just hope that your story and your father's story would catch the attention of authors and filmmakers, and these stories should be told. I mean, for example, Leon Uris's Exodus, published in the 1950s, I think that's the book you were referring to.
Yes.
Where
yes.
That's the book. I mean, it sold what, 50, 60, 70 million copies. That's back then. Then came Otto Preminger's Exodus, one of the, in my opinion, one of the greatest propaganda films ever made. I'm sorry to say that perhaps the greatest propaganda films were made by Leni Riefenstahl. Triumph of the Will and Olympiads. Too bad she didn't come over to our side after the war. We could have used her brains and talents. So it would really be wonderful to see someone's listening or watching this out there, like the author of Schindler's List who went into that clothing store. Please, you've got a TV series here, a book series here, a film series here. Go get them. Now I hand it back. I know David has a question or comment I think you wanted to make on behalf of someone that you didn't make, or did you make it already, David?
Yeah, no, this was just a general, because I was wondering your opinion on the migration crisis, probably the biggest issue currently in the U.S. right now, the how to handle the migrants at the border. And I know that there's a lot of so to say, divergence between um, Israeli Jews and American Jews, because among American Jews, probably the single biggest issue is being pro-immigrant, and Israel's not necessarily that way. And I'm not sure if as a Hispanic country, if you have any insight on what's going on at the U.S. border, what you think is going to happen, or moving forward.
I started telling you how Costa Rica is an isthmus, and most of the people in South America, especially those, most of the people, no matter from where, in South America, are people whose ancestors passed through Costa Rica, unless somehow they managed to make it over the sea, because that was the only way of getting here from Bering Strait. So this situation as an isthmus point is something that always affects us. And there have always been migrations. During our 1856 war against the filibusters of William Walker, there was an interesting place that still exists, which is a river between Costa Rica and Nicaragua, the San Juan River, where we have a lot of discussions with Nicaragua, and which connect with the Lake of Nicaragua, and then through land with the Atlantic, and used to be the only way to bridge time to get to California. And this was very important in the gold discovery in California. So migration is always a very important thing, but particularly now in a time of pandemic, where we have the virus attacking from everywhere with new breeds. In Costa Rica, we're doing quite well with our vaccination. We're still beginning. I was vaccinated, my second dose, just 2 weeks ago. And we're still waiting for younger people to be vaccinated. There's the discussions of our Social Security, if we should go on buying Pfizer, which most of us want to do, or buying AstraZeneca. And there's a lot of discussions in this, which are involved with this also, because at the same time, Costa Rica, we have a new wave president who's very young, unexperienced, and he belongs to the wave of thoughts more akin to revolution and other things. He used to be a communist a few years ago. Now he doesn't admit on it, but well, it doesn't matter. And he started signing things and went and signed international documents of declaring open borders. Now, the problem with open borders here is that most of the people here that come from South America, they're really not coming here. They want to get to the United States. There are interesting studies made by Gallup poll around the world, where they ask people where they want to go, and everybody wants to go to the United States. I don't know, nobody says they want to go to live in Cuba, or want to go to live in Venezuela, or want to go to live. I have a very good friend whom I love very much, a Colombian lady. She lives some of the time in Jerusalem because her daughter studied music at the Hebrew University. And she lives in the island of Lesbos. And she lives in the island of Lesbos, and what she does is that she receives children and migrants who come in boats from Turkey and from Syria. But they're the same thing. They're not going to Lesbos. Nobody wants to stay in Lesbos. I mean, they tell me it's a beautiful island, but they want to go on. And among the things that she tells me is the children that she tends taking care of in care centers. They make their drawings, and in their drawings they draw Turkish soldiers menacing them and pushing them on the boats to go to go to Lesbos or to wherever to go continue their trip. This is a thing in the world. It's going on. The problem we have here is that when they're here in Costa Rica, when they let them come in, they can't continue their march because the Nicaraguans won't let them in. They will push them back with their army. So they stay here. And they come unvaccinated. They come with and it's a very serious problem for us. I understand, in the United States, there is no crisis. There is a situation, the President Kamala Harris says. And, if they want to call it whatever they want, they have to do something about it. They have never done it. I remember in our international meetings many years ago, when I was vice minister and director of foreign policy, we would constantly meet with Latin American and North American immigration authorities to treat the problem of illegal immigration. We came to the conclusion, semantic things, there is no such thing as illegal immigration. That's only migration. The illegal ones are the gangs that organize them and that move the people. But in the United States, if you talk about those gangs, I understand they don't like it because we call them the namesake for those gangs are coyotes. So I don't know, I understand they didn't like terming them coyotes. But these are really criminals that kill their clients, that rob from their clients. And they are the ones who are making money, and the people are locked up in cages, yes, because they can't handle them. It's something that needs continental programs. It needs a lot of care. And there is the wall, the Trump wall. I don't believe in walls.
No.
I don't believe in walls because they've never worked. The Chinese wall never worked. I know your wall is important because I saw your wall being built. I've traveled all your wall in a helicopter, and I know the wall doesn't exist. It's only in urban places. And I saw why those urban places need the walls. I remember when I forget the name of the neighborhood in Israel where people would fire from Bethlehem at the people. And so they had to build the first track of the wall to avoid the shootings. In that sense, they do work. But to stop people from migrating, they will always find a way to get through. I don't know. It's a decision for each country. In Costa Rica, there have been sometimes proposals to make walls because Costa Rica, it's not new. During the days of the Arias government, for instance, and before that, the first Arias government, there was ideas about building walls because the amount of immigrants we have from Nicaragua. In Costa Rica, we have something which hovers between 500 to 700,000 migrants from Nicaragua, because actually they come seasonally to work in Costa Rica and they go back. And we have tried to work on different proposals. It has always met with the problems of illegality, of accusations of corruption in giving the permits and everything. But it's people move, and there's no way to stop them, but they must be regulated, and governments have to get to agreements on that. It's very complex, and well, that's what I can say about it. Now, I don't believe, as some people believe, that migration is a human right. No, it's not a human right, because there's sovereignty. I know I can't migrate to Cuba. In fact, I don't know if they'll let me go back to Cuba right now. But in any case,
the town is
waves of immigration.
Beit Jala was the village that they were firing on Gilo. Yeah, that was the name of the town, Beit Jala.
Yes, Gilo. Yeah.
But
that's where I used to go do my shopping.
But the town
I used to go to a supermarket that was open.
Was Beit Jala. Beit Jala.
What do you think about
the Arab village?
Yeah.
What do you think about the demographic changes and the effect? Because you're probably in North and South America. Jews were one of the bigger minorities going back even 50, 100 years, like in Canada, North America, probably even most of South America, that there were more Jews than Arabs or Indians or Chinese historically, that, you know, Jews were a significant minority, where the average person in North and South America was more likely to have interaction with a Jew than a, you know, Chinese, Muslim, or Indian. And now that's not the case at all. You know, like in Canada, there's more Chinese, there's more Arabs, there's more Indians than Jews. In America, there's millions of Jews, but the numbers are getting close to where there's soon going to be more Arabs, more Indians, more Chinese in America than Jews. And I understand that's also the case in South America. Probably like Costa Rica 100 years ago, there were 50 years ago, there were way more Jews than Arabs, Indians, or Chinese. I don't know the demographics today, but I would guess that that's quickly changing, and there's probably more Arabs, Indians, Chinese, even in Costa Rica than Jews today.
Yeah. I remember when I was a child in New York, if I heard somebody speaking Spanish in New York, I know it was a Puerto Rican. And when people heard my family and I speaking Spanish, they would say, "You are Puerto Rican." My mother would carry in her purse a map of Costa Rica and a map of Puerto Rico, and would give a geography lesson to the American that was asking, and explain the differences between an island, which is an associate state of the United States, and thanks to Luis Muñoz Marín, and an independent, etc., country like Costa Rica. And actually, it's at that time, I'm talking about the 1950s, it was difficult. There wasn't so many Spanish-speaking people in New York. Sometimes you would hear somebody speaking Spanish. There was one cinema in New York where I think it was the Edison, the name of the movie house, where they would have Mexican movies. My mother used to go there very often to watch Arturo de Córdoba, the big Mexican artists. But it was the only one. Now it's such a mixture that it's changed. Demography changes in the world, and it's getting bigger. In Costa Rica, here in my hometown, I went to give a talk to the children in school the other day, and I found one Jewish family. Now, this was a Costa Rican family that their parents converted to Judaism, and they're Jewish, and the kids wore their kippah and everything. But there was also a Muslim family, and they were really from somewhere in the Middle East. And they even wore burqas and everything. So there are things you didn't see before. And, well, we're beginning to see it. Hey, what can we do?
Well, what about I mean, we mentioned Palestine and the President Arias, and you know, like I know in Metro Detroit, you know, now there's well over 10,000 Palestinians here, and I think in South America it's also becoming that way, where even in some places there's more Palestinians than Jews living there, and you know, diplomacy of Costa Rica, where you were representing a semi-sizable Jewish population, and where Jews are one of the main minorities, does it make a difference at some point as the Palestinian community of Costa Rica gets larger and larger and the Jewish community gets smaller and smaller?
No, the Jewish is not getting smaller and smaller. The Jewish, our Jewish community has several particularities. One of them, they are very rich, very rich. And they usually all go to services, etc. They actually have about 4 synagogues, but there's the big one, the traditional one, the CIS, the Centro Israelita Sionista. It's a big center with a beautiful synagogue, really incredible, and a center for social things and everything. I go there very often. They invite me always very, very kindly. And so some of them are, of course, ex-Costa Ricans who converted to Judaism. And they have a very important, we even have a candidate for president who is a Jew. And we have had several times presidents of Congress, a lot of congressmen. In President Figueres' first government, we had a vice president, and then in Laura Chinchillas, we had another vice president who were Jewish. And it's actually more common to find people in power being Jewish. I understand they don't like it very much. The Jewish community doesn't like them because they feel that being outstanding, it will make them a target. But it hasn't happened here, fortunately. However, I must tell you that I know from my contacts in our security community that there's always a lot of care of the security of the Jewish center. And they have their own security arrangements. It's like a fort, big walls, special cares. To go in, it's very difficult, and I know my friends there. They take care of themselves. There aren't actual threats. We take very much care of that. But we know it will come. But we know it will come because when you look at Latin America, the most important threat is not from migration, but from actual programs by the Iranians in Latin America, where they have, for instance, I met in Cuba a fellow who is the CEO of a bank, the Francs Bank from Lebanon. Now, the Francs Bank from Lebanon is a second floor bank. They have a big mansion in Havana, which is provided by the Cuban government. And the second floor, they have their offices, 2 or 3 employees, but they don't work at a bank. Their only client, as I was told by the CEO, is the Cuban government, who gets money loaned by them. I asked him, just for the sake of it, do they pay back? So he laughed. I'm certain it's money that comes from Hezbollah. And it's money that not only goes to the Cuban government, but goes to other places in Latin America. I know it's present in other places. I know, and everybody knows, there are very interesting books on it, on the Iranian presence in Latin America. And also Hamas presence is an economical. It operates in Nicaragua. It operates in Venezuela very much, especially in the island of Margarita and in places such as the free frontiers in Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina, and there are big operations there, and a lot of money, and they have a lot to do with drug traffic.
Does that change your role in diplomacy? Because Costa Rica, if it's a democracy, at a certain point when the demographics change, does that change your role as a diplomat? If there's more Iranians in Costa Rica than Jews, do you have to factor that in, no matter how much you like Israel, that you're part of democracy? That hasn't
happened, but that doesn't happen, but it could happen in time. No, Iranians in Costa Rica, very few. The only Iranian I know actually is a businessman. He used to have an airline where my son worked, but he was an Iranian on the other side of the Shah's group.
Well, thanks. Just interesting issues probably facing Jewish communities globally. The demographic change. You mentioned the border. A lot, even in America, the concept of demographic replacement is a buzzword of anti-Semitism, but certainly changing demographics is a huge issue.
Yes.
Can I ask you, what is the Jewish population, the numbers in Costa Rica? Has it stayed? Mm-hmm. You know what how many Jews are living in Costa Rica, roughly? Or any idea?
No, I don't. But it's not a very large number. Mm-hmm. It's very visible community. And it's very known. They are all from the same town in Poland. I forget the name of the town. And sometimes they have big fights among them. Sure. And it's a typical Jewish community.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
There are some Reform Jews. There are some...
Is it only 3,000? I'm looking on just a Google search, and I found the
road. No, I think there are more. Well, especially, you have the children. Then there are those that have married outside the community. And then there's always the problem of what? I forgot the word. I forgot the word in Spanish and in English. Endogamia. The tendency
intermarriage.
Yeah.
And could there be, is there a question of
I never
like the
had
right
a
of
Jewish
return?
girlfriend until I lived in Israel the last time.
Are there issues, you know, in Israel and the right of return and the who is a Jew question, where they're more liberal on defining a Jew in Costa Rica than you know, than maybe Israel is?
No, no, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. Costa Rica is quite open. For instance, we had this. We had a horrible law once established in Costa Rica in the 1940s, which forbade the immigration of Jews. There were already Jews here. Besides there, we had Marrano Jews, but nobody ever knows about them because, well, they're secretive. And who knows?
Yeah, I know. I mean, Israel, it was in America, they call them the Lave Tahor cult, which, you know, extremist Jews that were largely kicked out of the US and Canada and Israel. And I think they found haven in Guatemala, but they're having you know, problems because they're practicing Judaism at a level that almost everyone else considers extreme.
Now we have something interesting, which is a lot of Messianic Jews. But Messianic Jews were Costa Ricans who they are Protestants, not traditional Protestants, but of the new
Evangelicals.
Evangelicals. Whatever they have another word which they add to evangelical, and they
charismatic.
Charismatic, and they usually meet in their churches or places of worship, and they always have a flag of Israel. And sometimes their minister will wear a kippah and call himself a rabbi. And they make an interesting mixture. And they are very, very pro-Israeli. Now, I met those in Israel too. And the problem is that they want you to become Christian.
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses.
I think that's a problem.
Jehovah's Witnesses and
that's more complex.
Jews for
those
Jesus.
Are loaded. Those have a huge center here.
Yeah.
And they do a lot of missionary activity.
Yeah.
One last question I was wondering about colorism in Costa Rica. I mean, you know, Jews come in all colors and sizes, but, you know, generally Ashkenazic Jews are on the whiter side of things. Like in Europe, we might have been noticeably darker.
Yeah, we are.
But in Costa Rica, are Jews considered white? Is there a colorism issue where whites do better in Costa Rica than darker skinned people? And would Jews fall on the more whiter side of colorism, or is colorism not a big problem in Costa Rica?
No, we just know they came here, they got off boats, they were very poor, and they started selling things on horseback, going into the country and selling things. They would sell towels, and they would let you pay for them in installments. And they would always be traveling in their horses. And then all of a sudden they started having stores. Then those stores turned into factories. Now, our biggest and most important newspaper is an electronic paper, which is called CR News. And it belongs to a Jewish friend of mine who happened to have been Minister of Finance once, and he owns a bank also.
Is there an issue of colorism, though, in Costa Rica in general, of racism? And would it benefit Jews, or would it make no difference?
We don't really worry about that. For instance, in Costa Rica, the only color thing that might affect us is that, for instance, a regular Costa Rican will talk about the negritos in the old generations. Now it's not right, but we would say el negrito, la negrita.
How about the
And when
peninsulares?
we say negrito or negrita, it's a endearment term, but it also involves a certain distinction and separation. And now we just say negros, but this, we haven't arrived to that complex thing that you have in the United States.
How about the peninsulares? That distinction between the original Spaniards and the natives, nativos.
No, we had that many years ago. Now nobody gives any importance to that.
Mestizos, are there mestizos?
Yeah, no.
No.
Everybody's a mestizo in Costa Rica.
Right.
I can tell you, in my case, I discovered one of these days because of a cousin of mine who is, I've never been given to genealogy, but a cousin of mine, her daughter started making a genealogy of my mother's line and found that in my mother's line, we are descendants of a great cacique Garavito, who was a big rebel, a big hero. He was a king. And, well, it's nice to be a king, but he was a rebel king, which the Spanish could never conquer. That's nice.
Okay, wonderful. It's going to be it's going to be the 1 minute silence in about another minute and a half for Yom HaZikaron. So Lowell, I think this is a good place to. Wow, you must be very exhausted, Mr. Ambassador. You've been amazing, incredible.
Amazing.
There are no words to thank you for your valuable time. It's been riveting listening to you. And I really, really feel, and I think all of us feel, that what your father and what you've done is so important that it should be really acknowledged. And just your father alone standing at the United Nations with Moynihan, the Israeli ambassador, the three stand up for what was right and what was, against Zionism is racism. That in itself is just unbelievable. That in itself is incredible. It's iconic. It's so important. So my wish is that we really should hopefully translate that book, and we should advance, and we should people should know more about Costa Rica, about what you've done, what your father's done, and we admire you. We admire you, and we are exceptionally grateful to you and to the New River.
One of the speeches of my father at the United Nations that is in that book is the speech he made on the equating of Zionism as a form of racism. When that issue came at the United Nations, only 3 people spoke against it. I'm not saying voted, spoke against it. It was Pat Moynihan from the United States, who was the ambassador. It was your president or later president of Israel, who was an ambassador at the United Nations, and my father.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And his speech on that is actually fabulous. And that's one of that was translated into English by Lowell's friend some years ago.
Well, we want to thank you. We extend all the very best, and we'll be in touch. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
God bless.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Buena suerte. Avanzaremos. Patria o muerte.
Obrigado.
Okay, I sent Lowell the chip with my talk in Spanish about the example for Palestine as a country without an army.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Gracias.
Goodbye.
Muchas gracias.
De nada, gusto verlos.
Leitraot.
Adiós. Leitraot.
Salam.